going to send a message to the billionaire class. You can't have it all.
I'm running for president of the United States because we have 4 beautiful kids and 7 incredible grandchildren. And I want to make sure that the country we leave them is a nation that we are proud of. My mother was born and raised in New York City. She died at the age of 46. We had a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment. At that very early age, I think I began to realize the impact that lack of finances have on families. My father came to this country from Poland at the age of 17, worked every day of his life. I grew up in Brooklyn. Many of the families were immigrants, and they understood the importance of education. We don't have a strong economy unless we have a very well-educated workforce.
That is why I, as president, will fight to make tuition in public colleges and universities free, as well as substantially lower interest rates on student loans.
At the University of Chicago, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We ended up engaging in a sit-in demonstration. I believe that you're entitled to justice and to equal rights, whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're gay, whether you're transgender. You are a human being. I went to Washington to demonstrate. We went out there on the mall. It was an extraordinary speech. I had the feeling that I was, at that particular moment, part of history. I ended up winning my first election as mayor of Burlington by 10 votes after a recount in an election that nobody thought we could win. I met Jane just about the time of the election. We have been together for 27 years.
As president, I will defend the station, but I will do it responsibly. As a member of Congress, I voted against the war in Iraq, and that was the right thing.
I had serious doubts about what Bush and Cheney were telling us. And if you overthrew Saddam Hussein, you could bring a massive amount of instability into that region, and that it would not be quite as easy as people like Donald Rumsfeld and others were telling us. We have got to, as a moral responsibility, provide the best quality health care to men and women who put their lives on the line to defend us. John McCain and I put $5 billion into strengthening the VA so that any veteran who walks into a VA facility will get quality care in a timely manner. That was one of the major pieces of legislation passed in the last congressional session. I don't want to see people not go to the doctor when they're sick because they can't afford to pay the doctor's fees.
The United States must join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all as a right.
Nothing is closer to my heart as someone who has kids besides the issue of global warming.
There is nothing more important than leaving this country and our entire planet habitable for our kids and our grandchildren. Climate change is real. It is caused by human activity, and we have a small window opportunity to transform our energy system, cut carbon emission, and move in a very different direction. This campaign is about putting Americans back to work at decent paying jobs. Let's get started. Let's put $1 trillion over a 5-year period. Let's create and maintain 13 million jobs. Let's make our infrastructure stronger, safer, more efficient.
We must establish pay equity for women workers.
Bottom line is that if somebody works in this country for 40 hours a week, that person should not be living in poverty.
The issue of wealth and income inequality is the great moral issue of our time. It is the great economic issue of our time. It is the great political issue of our time. This type of rigged economy is not what America is supposed to be about. This has got to change. And as your president, together, we are going to change it.
I will be working hard to overturn Citizens United. That is the undermining of American democracy and the qualities of this country which have made us the envy of the entire world. Today in America, we have enormous problems. They are solvable problems. This country belongs to all of us. We want to make policy that improves the lives of all of our people. That's how we transform America.
Thank you very much. Wow, that's so nice. And all from you beautiful people, too. Good afternoon. My name is Reggie Cathy, and I am excited to be here with you today to introduce the man of the hour and the candidate I support in this race, United States Senator Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Bernie was once a mayor who decided things needed to be done differently to see real change. He took on the establishment and challenged his community to think outside of its predetermined box. Bernie was a new voice that was not afraid to speak truth to power and stand up for everyday people, hard-working people. And much to my delight, not much about Bernie has changed. A staunch advocate for working people, Bernie has been a foot soldier in the fight for justice and equality in America. He continues to challenge the status quo and is transforming the landscape of American politics. Bernie Sanders is a leading political figure who's leading a revolution. Look around and you'll see that the revolution is happening now, today. And thanks to BET, the revolution will be televised. Please join me in welcoming to the stage United States Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much. Reg, thank you very much for the introduction. 2020 Leaders of America, thank you for putting on this important conference. And let me from the start suggest I am not Frank Underwood. No way. The issue you are talking about is wrenching the hearts of the American people. Consciousness on criminal justice reform has risen significantly in the last couple of years. A lot of that has to do with this kind of invention here, where for years a lot of crimes were being committed that were not being talked about, but now when they get videoed and they get on television, they are being talked about, and that is a very, very good thing. And it is clearly time that we start talking, as we have in this election, about the really disastrous effects of too many politicians trying to woo too many elections by locking too many people up. Now, throughout our lives, all of us can remember, we're going to be tough on crime, we're going to throw away the key, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But all of that has resulted in an international disgrace, and I trust that all of you know it, that the United States of America today has more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, which is an authoritarian communist country 4 times our size. And we as a people have to lay this issue right on the table. And that is that people in American jails are disproportionately, to a very significant degree, people of color. And that is the reality in America today, and that is a reality that has to change. Too many lives, too many lives are being destroyed, and together we are going to bring about major reforms of a broken criminal justice system. Let me start with an issue that is on everyone's mind, and that is the continuing struggle for racial justice in America. And let's start with the facts. These are not pleasant facts, but these are facts we have got to discuss. If current trends continue, approximately 1 in 4 black males born today, a child born here in South Carolina today, can expect to spend time in prison during his lifetime. This is an unspeakable time. This is the rate of whites People of color are incarcerated, policed, and sentenced to death at significantly higher rates than their white counterparts. 1 in every 15 African American men is incarcerated, compared to 1 in every 106 white men. A report by the Department of Justice found that blacks were 3 times more likely to be searched during a traffic stop compared to white motorists. African Americans are twice as likely to be arrested and almost 4 times as likely to experience the use of force during encounters with the police. African Americans make up 2/5 of confined youth today. African American women are 3 times more likely than white women to be incarcerated. Once convicted, black offenders receive longer sentences, 10% longer, than white offenders for the same exact crimes. 13% of African American men have lost the right to vote due to felony convictions. And this, by the way, is an issue we don't talk about very much, but it is of huge political consequence. 13% of African American men have lost their right to vote. These are shocking statistics, to say the least. But before we even address them, we have to deal with the most urgent and obvious issue that needs to be addressed head on. And that is the killing of African Americans by police or deaths while in custody. The seemingly endless stream of tragedies we hear about screams out for justice. The Black Lives Matter movement, which has arisen in response to these deaths, has done a needed and commendable job in raising public consciousness on this issue. The proliferation of cell phone video has brought the reality of these deaths into the living room and onto the computer screen of millions and millions of people throughout our country. I know you have heard these names before, but they bear repeating, so we do not lose sight of the real human price being paid. Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Samuel DuBose, Rekia Boyd, and many, many others. But people must do more than just echo the phrase, Black Lives Matter. We must put actions behind those words. Actions that will bring about the fundamental reform that is needed in the face of this crisis. Criminal justice reform must be the civil rights issue of the 21st century, and the first piece that we must address is police reform. The killings of unarmed African Americans has got to stop. Across our nation, too many African Americans and other minorities find themselves subjected to a system that treats citizens who have not committed crimes as if they were criminals. A growing number of communities do not trust the police, and police have become disconnected, alien to the communities that they are sworn to protect. At the federal level, we need to establish a new model police training program that reorients the way we do law enforcement in this country. With input from a broad segment of the community, we must reinvent how we police America.
A critically important component of this reform is a set of new rules on the allowable use of force. Lethal force must be the last resort, not the first resort. Police officers need to be trained to de-escalate confrontations and to humanely interact with people who have mental illnesses. Someone, and by the way, this happened in my own state of Vermont, not a minority. Woman called the police department because her mentally ill son was acting out. Son got shot and killed. And that happens all across this country. We also need police forces that reflect the diversity of our communities. And that must extend into the leadership of police departments and into the training departments. Clearly, we need greater civilian oversight of police departments and ongoing and meaningful community engagement. We need to federally fund and require body cameras for law enforcement officers to make it easier to hold them accountable. But we also must establish standards and processes to protect the privacy of innocent people. Our Justice Department must aggressively investigate and prosecute police officers who break the law and hold them accountable for their actions. We may need to examine when current federal civil rights status provides the Justice Department to protect the people of this country. We need to require police departments and states to provide public reports on all police shootings and deaths that take place while in police custody. And the federal government should provide funding to help state and local governments adopt these new policing standards. State and local governments who participate in police reform should be rewarded by the federal government. Those who do not should. Further, and very importantly, we must demilitarize police departments around this country. You know, sometimes you look at the television and it looks like there is an invading army. It looks like you're in Iraq rather than looking at a local police department. Establish standards and crack down on communities that are using their police forces essentially as revenue generating amount of their local funding through fines and citations need to be stopped. In African American communities across this country, there is a strong sense among many activists and others that I have spoken to that there is over-policing in some African American communities. Now, I know that some will say that's because there is more crime in those poor black urban communities. But if we jump to that conclusion, we should examine recent 2014 Bureau of Justice Statistics report examining the relationship between household poverty and non-lethal violent victimization, which includes rape or sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, and simple assault. And this is what it found for the period studied from 2008 through 2012. Poor people living in urban areas had violent victimization rates similar to poor people living in rural areas. Poor urban blacks had rates of violence similar to poor urban whites.
Now, I represent in Vermont a rural state, and I have to tell you that I do not see the level of intensity of policing that we seem to see in so many cities around the country. Now, of course, people committing violent crimes need to be apprehended, tried by a jury of their peers, and if they are convicted, they need to go to jail. Nobody debates that we want criminals and people who are dangerous for law-abiding people off of the streets. And let me also say, and I say this closely with the Burlington, Vermont Police Department, that the vast majority of police officers in this country are honest, they are working hard, and they do a good job under very, very difficult circumstances. However, we cannot ignore the fact that the majority of people living in our cities are trying to work hard, to play by the rules, and to raise their children safely. There are neighborhoods in this country, and you all know this, where mothers, it's hard to believe in America, but it's true, where mothers are afraid to let their children go outside for fear of gang violence and drugs, and we owe it to those mothers of the color of their skin. And they should not be worried that a routine interaction with law enforcement ends in inappropriate force or even death. We do not want any mother in America to have to worry about that. But of course, our entire approach, we cannot jail our way out of health problems like drug addiction or social and economic problems like poverty. We must end the over-incarceration of nonviolent young Americans who do not pose a serious threat to our society. African Americans comprise 14% of regular drug users, but are 37% of those arrested for drug offenses. From 1980 to 2007, about 1 in 3 adults arrested for drugs in the United States was African American. Now, how many, I want you to think about this, how many encounters between young people and the police begin with officers detecting the odor of marijuana? It is unacceptable to me that we stigmatize so many young Americans with a criminal record for possessing marijuana, but at the same time, not one major CEO of a Wall Street bank whose illegal activities helped destroy the economy of the United States, not one of them has a police record. It appears that we have a criminal justice is a bank too big to fail, but bankers are too big to jail. And jail. And by the way, all of that, the fact that hundreds and hundreds of lives of young people have been destroyed because they get police records for smoking marijuana, and the fact that no CEOs of Wall Street firms get police records, all of this has a huge impact upon people's attitude toward the government, upon justice, upon fairness. But in that regard, our attitude toward marijuana legislation, which takes marijuana off of the federal list of controlled substances. It is frankly absurd under the Controlled Substance Act that marijuana is a Schedule I drug alongside of heroin. Makes no sense at all to me. So we want to get the federal government out of the business of making marijuana illegal. If states want to go forward, that is their right to do that, and they should be able to do that without legal impediments from the federal government. Furthermore, when we talk about reforming a broken criminal justice system, we need to end prisons for profit. And I've introduced legislation to do that, and as president, I will make that happen. It is simply wrong for corporations to be making profits through the incarceration of fellow Americans or running detention centers. That is not an area where people should be making profits. We furthermore have got to invest in drug courts and interventions for people with substance abuse problems. And our goal must be that people with substance abuse problems, and by the way, this is a huge problem from one end of this country to the other. Huge problem in my state. People say, oh, Vermont, not a drug problem. We have a very serious problem with opiates and heroin. Okay, it is a problem all over America. But what we must understand is that substance abuse is a disease, not a crime, and we've got to treat it as a health issue. And in that regard, we have got to do a lot better with mental health in America. We need a revolution in how we be able to get into a treatment center and get the care they need to wait for 2 years. In addition, to end mandatory minimum sentencing and give judges the discretion to better tailor sentences to the specific facts of a given case. As you know, judges often now do not have discretion. The federal system of parole needs to be reinstated. For people who are serving long sentences, there needs to be an incentive for people to make different choices and earn their way to a shorter sentence and a path to a productive life. For people who have committed crimes that have landed them in jail, there needs to be a path back from prison, and that includes a restoration of full voting rights. Now, I don't have to tell you that by and large, we do a pretty bad job in making sure that when people are released from jail, they don't end up in jail again. Clearly, you don't have to be a criminologist to understand that if somebody leaves jail without job training, without education, without money, without housing, the odds are that they will fall of taxpayers' dollars, and we have got to end that. And if we are truly going to move away from over-incarceration, there are a number of systemic issues that we must address, but let me just mention two of them now. The first is the disparity in education for children in poor communities and poor communities of color in particular. Black children, who make up just 8 in particular, for 48% of all out-of-school suspensions before kindergarten. And not just kindergarten. Our black children before kindergarten. Black students were expelled at 3 times the rate of white children. Black girls were suspended at higher rates than all other girls and most boys. According to the Department of Education, African American students are more likely to suffer harsh punishments, suspensions, and arrest at school. We must address the lingering, unjust stereotypes that lead us to label black youths as thugs or super predators. Let me tell you just a story, if I might. Southern part of my state, there was a principal, she is retired, who was absolutely fierce and determined to drop out of school. She would personally kill them if they dropped out of school. Mentors who were available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that if a kid had a family problem at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was somebody that kid could call. If a kid was dealing with drugs or getting involved in that, the mentor was there. The truth of the matter is, if we are serious about keeping kids out of jail, if we are serious about making sure our kids are in school or have jobs, yes, we can do that. We do not need to allow millions of kids to fall through the cracks, to hang out on street corners, to get into trouble, to end up in jail, and to see their lives, to end up in jail. We need to give all of our kids, regardless of their income, a fair shot at attending college. Now, my parents never went to college. My dad dropped out of high school, my mother graduated high school. And in our family, which was lower middle class, we didn't know many people who went to college. That's just the way it is. There are millions of kids in this country whose parents never went to college. They don't know anybody who went to college. And the idea of getting a higher education is about as meaningful to them as going to the moon. It ain't gonna happen. And that is why I have introduced legislation and will make happen as president, a process by which every public tuition free. Now, why is that important? Well, we know the obvious reasons why, so people don't come out of school deeply in debt and so forth. But here is a more important reason, and I want you to think about it, because it really is revolutionary. What it says is that every child in America, whether in my hometown of Burlington, Vermont, or here in Columbia, South Carolina, if you do your schoolwork well, if you pay attention, if you are serious about school, you will be able to go to college regardless of the income of your family. Millions of kids and teachers will have hope and belief that they can make it into the middle class if they do well in school. We have to stop the criminalization of classroom misbehavior. Who in this room, by the video that we recently saw of the resource officer throwing a young girl across the room right here in South Carolina. There is a pipeline from school to jail that we have to turn into a pipeline from school to a promising future. The second issue that we have got to deal with, because all of these issues are interrelated, they have to be dealt with in a holistic manner, is the issue of poverty. of poverty. We are living today in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But very few people know that, because most of the wealth, almost all of the wealth, and almost all of the income being generated today goes to the top 1%. We have 47 million people in America living in poverty, and shamefully, and this is a total disgrace, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. 20% of our kids, close to 40% of African American kids. Now you tell me the justice of a society in which the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Tell me the justice of a society in which we are seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, and yet we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. That is a disgrace. That is not what America is supposed to be about, and together we are going to end that. We live at a time when most Americans don't have $10,000 in savings. Imagine that. Wealthiest country in the history of the world, the majority of people in this country do not have $10,000. What happens if you have an automobile accident? What happens if you get sick? What happens if there's a divorce? And millions of Americans, age 50, 55, have zero in the bank. They have no clue as to how they're going to retire with dignity. Most Black and Latino households have less than $350 in, roughly twice as high as the white rate over the last 40 years, regardless of education. Let me tell you another story. I asked some economists a few months ago to do a study for me. I asked them to tell me what the rate of real unemployment, that is, unemployment and underemployment, for young people in this country, 17 to 20, who graduated high school, didn't drop out, graduated high school. This is what they said. White kids, 33%. Latino kids, 36%. African American kids, 51%. That's an entire generation of kids graduating, want to get out of the house, want to start their adult lives, nothing out there for them. So let me repeat, it makes a lot more sense for us to invest in education and jobs rather than jails and incarceration. Now, I won't give you a long speech about how we deal with the collapse of the American middle class and 47 million people living in poverty, but this is what I will tell you. We have got to create millions of jobs in this country, and one way we do it is by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. We're going to put 13 million people back to work in good-paying jobs. Another thing that we have got to do is recognize that a $7.25 minimum wage is a starvation wage. Got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And that, to my mind, is $15 an hour over the next few years. We have to make sure that poor communities have access to credit on fair terms, not payday lenders. You know, the pathetic truth is, it is very expensive to be poor. Do you know what I mean by that? All right. You cash your check and you pay an outrageous sum of money because you're not able to get a bank account in a normal bank. We got to change those things. Let me just conclude by thanking you all very much for holding this conference on an issue. I get around the country a whole lot. These issues that we're talking about today are on the minds of millions and millions of Americans, not just African Americans, but the entire community. We want to live in a nation in which we're not spending $80 billion a year locking up our neighbors. We want to live in a nation where an African American can get into his or her car and not worry about being dragged out of the car and being found dead 3 days later in a jail. So we got a lot of work in front of us. But this is an issue, to my mind, of enormous importance. It's an issue that we can and must work on together, and I have absolute confidence that when we come together, this is an issue that can be resolved. Thank you all very much.
Senator, how are you? Thank you. Would you like some water? Yep. Perfect. Senator, thank you so much. I want to get right into some questions. You laid out a lot, and in laying that out, especially around the issue of police reform, you went into a little bit of detail about how you see drugs being reformed, whether it's through the bill to remove marijuana from the list, or whether it's the creation of drug courts. But as it relates but there's a how factor. And so how does a Sanders administration deal with that kind of total reform of police departments when so much of the control is still in the midst of municipalities?
Well, you do it in the way that we historically do that, and that is you provide incentives to local police departments and state government. And the incentives are, look, are prepared to undertake reform. You are going to get financial remuneration for doing the right thing. With that carrot out there, we can bring about real change. Look, I think what we're seeing all over this country is cities and towns being humiliated, being embarrassed by what the American people are seeing on their television. And I think towns and cities want to do the right thing. Sometimes they don't know how to do the right thing. So what we need is expertise, we need training, and we need financial incentives to move local communities forward in this issue.
Does the federal government also do the flip side, which is withhold federal dollars from departments that have histories of abuse, misconduct, and excessive
I would
force?
say yes. I would say absolutely. If we see, and by the way, I think where the federal government also has a responsibility is every time somebody is killed, this becomes a federal issue and subject to a federal investigation.
Let me ask this, and this is not something that I think that's being talked about in mainstream, but in communities all over the country, you see mayors in cities having the control of their schools stripped from them because in many cases it's not believed that they have the ability to effectively administer education. Is it too off the charts to think that at some point municipalities that cannot control the excessive force that happened will ultimately have their police department responsibility remove an administrator come in to shift?
I mean, that's a fair question, but I should tell you as a former mayor, I know we got some local officials here. All right, that would be a very last resort. I mean, we want, in a democracy, we have people who are elected running their departments. But if your question is that we continue to see year after year after year, no changes in patently bad departments, the federal government should take a hard look at that.
I want to get a question from the audience. Quentin Washington from Atlanta, Georgia. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Senator Sanders, and thank you for coming. There was a recent study in New York about the stop and frisk policies where it showed that 80 to 90% of those didn't result in any convictions or any fines. And African Americans are 5 times more likely to suffer a stop and frisk. What would the Sanders administration do with this?
Well, again, those are decisions made at the local level, but I think in New York City, they have in fact made radical changes in their stop and frisk policies, and I think that is exactly the right thing to do. One of the issues here is people's attitude toward government in general. If you're walking down the street and you're stopped and you're frisked and you are harassed, as is the case with many young African Americans, you develop a certain type of attitude toward government, and it is not a good attitude. So bottom line to me, as I've said in my remarks, I want to see, and as mayor of Burlington, I worked on this, to see police departments be part of the community, not an alien force. And when you're stopping innocent people who are walking down the street for no particular reason, you become an alien, an oppressive force, and that's wrong.
I have a question from Facebook from Christina Diane Farmer, who says, Senator Sanders, you're known for your advocacy against private prisons. Opponents to your position on the issue have argued that private prisons are in fact beneficial due to instances in which they cost the government less money to operate than government-run prisons. In instances where private prisons are more cost-effective, how do you justify putting them out of business to replace them with more costly government-run prisons?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I agree with Diane's basic assertion that private prisons are more cost-effective. But let me also tell you, Diane, there are instances, hard to believe, true, took place in Pennsylvania, where judges were sending kids to private jails and getting a kickback for doing that. Now, I'm not saying that happens all of the time, but the bottom line is you do not want to incentivize the system to be locking people up. If I'm a private prison, what do I want? I want more prisoners. I want types of laws which result in more people being locked up. So I do not believe, for a dozen different reasons, that corporations should be making money off of locking our people up. I want to see incentives to get our people out of jail, incentives to make sure our people do not get into jail, not a situation where people are making more and more money based on more and more people ending up in jail.
There's a great deal of excitement from the audience and others when you announced that you want to see American citizens be able to get higher education for free. The question is, how does a Sanders administration pay for that?
Oh, I forgot about that. I knew I forgot something. No, okay. Here's the point. Now, let me be very frank with you. As I think those of you who may know a little bit about me know that my type of politics is a little bit different than other people running for president. I look at the world in a little different way, and this is how I start. When I talk about economic issues, I start off with the understanding that in the last 30 years, there has been a massive redistribution of wealth in America. Do you all know that? Problem is, the redistribution has gone in the wrong direction. What we have seen is trillions of dollars flowing from the hands of working families and the middle class, ending up into the hands of the top 1/10 of 1%. Last 30 years, the top 1/10 of 1% has seen a doubling of the percentage of wealth that it owns, a doubling of wealth. So I start off with the view that at a time when the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well, when you have huge corporations making extraordinary profits, and in some cases paying zero in federal taxes, when you have bailed out Wall Street as a result of their greed and recklessness, I pay for free tuition in public colleges and universities through a tax on Wall Street speculation. That's how I pay for that.
I want to get the last question from the audience from Taraji Lester, who is the Benedict College student body president.
Hey.
Hi, Taraji. We just chatted earlier today.
Yes, we did. I want to know how will we have an America where Black Lives Matter by the end of your first term as president in the year 2020?
I'm sorry, Taraji, stay a little bit closer into the mic, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I want to know how will we have an America where Black Lives Matters and by the first term of the president, how would it happen?
Okay. How it would happen, as I've just indicated, is that for a start, we would make this issue a major issue in my administration. In other words, it's not something we would push aside. It's an issue that we would bring the country together and say, in the following many ways, we are going to end the absurdity, the horror, the embarrassment of unarmed black men and women and children being killed by police officers or in police custody. We are going to bring about sweeping reforms of police departments all over this country. So to answer your question, it becomes for us a major priority in a Sanders administration.
Last question I have for you.
I thought
Senator.
that was the last question.
I said last question from the audience.
Oh, I didn't.
So,
Just kidding.
We've looked at the numbers, and everyone is doing a poll every other week. Some of us believe those polls, some of us don't. Do you think there's going to be a turn for you in this state of South Carolina? And what do you want to say to the people of South Carolina?
Thank you.
In that space?
Okay. Let me say this. I began this campaign close to 7 months ago. My guess is, somebody correct me if you think I'm wrong, probably 80–90% of the people in South Carolina did not know who the junior senator from the state of Vermont was. Is that a fair statement? All right, I know you've all been following my career for dozens of years, but one of two of you may not have. All right, so we started, and you know what the first poll was? Nationally, had us at 3%. 3%. We're running against one of the best known people in the world. We got America, in the world. All right? What has happened in the last 6 or 7 months is that, based on the last poll we saw in New Hampshire, we are ahead by a little bit. We are probably behind in Iowa today, but not by much. And we're going to do well in Nevada. We are going to do well here in South Carolina. We're not doing well right now. I'm the first to admit it. And I think the reason is that we have got to get our message out, and we're doing it. You're going to hear Reg, who introduced me. You're going to hear his beautiful voice on your radio stations throughout South Carolina. And you're going to see people knocking on doors throughout South Carolina. We believe from the bottom of my heart that the message that we have in terms of criminal justice issues that we discussed today, in terms of economic issues, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, providing health care to all people as a right, making public colleges and universities tuition free, addressing the crisis of childhood poverty. I believe that those issues will resonate all over South Carolina. And by the time Election Day comes, we're going to do very, very well in this state.
Senator, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, great.